The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host, ably assisted this morning by my canine co-host, Toto. If you are listening only, he's now sniffing my face and is just calm. He's 7 pounds of a rescue poodle who's just a great beloved. Well, today our episode is part 2 of a trilogy. It's the story of Leaper Bob. He's at the the end of book 2 in a special section that I included when I was writing this. He and another person both committed suicide, or as the other one, B, said she took matters into her own hands. They both came in the same dream that felt like a diptych. You know what a diptych is? A diptych is what a book looks like when you have it opened, and there's that crease in the middle and 2 planes. A diptych in church often will have complementary characters like Mary and Joseph, each depicted on one side of it, but they're linked together in one piece of art. That's the way this dream happened. I talked about this in the last episode in great depth, but in the dream, I was in an American city. It felt like I was about 100 years past. The buildings were old and in decay. They all looked like they were once grand, and it made me want to fix them. I watch a lot of those home repair shows where people take dilapidated places and make them beautiful again. Anyway, in the dream, the second part of it involved a man getting into an elevator, and I chose at the last minute to get in with him, and then it fell like we were dying. I've never been in an elevator that malfunctioned in that way, but I know that they do, or at least they have in the past. Anyway, that was the dream. And when we got to go into protected prayer with this person, it happened, we learned that he had been in financial services, working in a city when the Great Depression hit in 1929. He said, I wasn't one of those who lost a fortune overnight, but he said, what I lost was my livelihood, that many people had no money left to invest with a financial advisor. And then others didn't really trust the financial advice they've gotten from financial advisors that led to the crash. So he said, my livelihood that I thought was going to be my career for life shriveled up. He explained to us that he had a wife and 3 small children at home. Home life began to be fraught with fighting and tension over bill paying. With the children being so small, they tried a little bit of farming the children off to family members to care for, so his wife might be able to work and earn a little income to pay some bills. But he just said family life was going off the rails. He also admitted that he never really let his wife in on what he was thinking, and he was drinking. He was in the early stages of alcoholism, and he explained to us that he was losing hope. And in the end, he worked in a building that had a hotel on the couple of upper floors with a kind of fancy restaurant on the top floor. He went up to the bar, had a couple of drinks, and then he had rented a hotel room that he knew he wouldn't pay for. And he just, he said, I went from the bar to the door to the window and leapt. But as you know, all of us are built in such a way that we just don't stay dead. We move through death to afterlife. And in his case, he described some of that for us. I wanted to tell you that I've made a few notes about what I'd like to include in this particular podcast. This story came to me in a dream 5 years ago. It was in November of 2019. And even then, the the stories happened in the early 1930s. At least that's what I think. And so they were already events that were like 85 to 90 years prior. And the fact that they came, a man and a woman, each of whom had died of suicide, and both around that same time, so long ago, it felt spirit directed to me. I have been a Catholic Christian my entire life. I was baptized, I love this detail, on April Fool's Day of 1956 when I was 3 weeks old. The consequence of Christian baptism, as we understand it, is the parents who have brought this new child forward uh, for baptism, they're asking God, would you please live inside our baby? Would your breath, your spirit breathe in our baby? So I believe the Holy Spirit has always been in me and by invitation, and I've tried to cultivate a deeper experience of the presence of the Spirit of God living inside of me. So um, when I hear people say, "Well, I think the universe is telling me this or that," my way of understanding that for myself is that the Holy Spirit is speaking inside me, and of course, dreams are something that happens interiorly. The fact that they came on the same night at the time that they did, I felt like was a prompting of the Spirit to say these stories could potentially be used in a future book. Um, I knew I didn't in my first Afterlife Interrupted book broach the topic of suicide, but when I spoke about that book, I very often would get comments from people who are interested in the afterlife primarily because they've lost a loved one, and sometimes that's been to suicide. And those are particularly difficult griefs, especially parents whose children commit suicide or a spouse. Very often people are left wondering, is there something I could have done to prevent it? It's a very complex grief. And I wouldn't go there um, indelicately, nor would I want the fact that I believe that life goes on and that there's a cosmic happy ending for all of us. I would not want to do anything to make suicide seem like a an attractive option for anyone. So anyway, this story came in November of 2019. We dealt with it almost immediately, went into protected prayer, and met, in this case, a man who didn't give us his name. We called him Leaper, not with any disrespect. We just needed to call him something. And we knew about him that he had leapt to his death. Um, I thought I'd spend a moment on how he ended up, why we ended up calling him Bob. It was almost all the way at the end of our interaction with him the second time when we got his permission to use the story. This was my sister Catherine talking with him. Um, let's see. Um, it just, she said, for the purposes of this book, can we refer to you as anything other than Leaper? Would doesn't have to be your actual name, but would you like us to call you by some other name? And he said, well, I'm thinking of something. Is there a name that defies gravity, that doesn't fall? Is there a name that maybe involves flight? And he thought about it for a minute. And then he said, my body fell, but part of me didn't. Part of me defied gravity. So I'm thinking, if I'm going to have some sort of nickname or identity, is there a male name for something that doesn't fall or maybe defies gravity? And then he came up with Orville or Wilbur, maybe. And then Catherine said, or something light. How about Bob? And he said, you mean something that kind of floats, like a cork that bobs on a fishing pole? I like it. All right, let's go with Bob. It's simple. I'm not heavy anymore. I float. And Catherine said, okay, you'll be officially known as Bob. I was thinking when we were little, my dad had bought a farm and then had a couple of lakes created on it by putting up a couple of dams that dammed a creek and formed a couple of ponds. And they were stocked by the state of Louisiana with catfish and um, perch and bass. the ones that I remember the most fun fishing for were the catfish because for their size, they could put up a big fight. You'd have a cork bobbing on the surface of the water, and if you got a strike by a catfish, it wasn't just a little nibble. They would grab onto it, pull it way under, and but then it would it's they're meant to float, so eventually the cork pops back up. Anyway, that was on my mind. He gave us his permission to use his story. I remember I told the story in the previous podcast, so I'm not going to go back into all that detail again. But he he knew that he had an opportunity by saying yes to letting his story be told in a book, that there was an opportunity for him to speak to people and maybe people who were considering taking their own lives. And he said that the short story was, I lost hope. Now, what he did tell us was that after he died, he realized that he hadn't completely died, that there was still a him. He spoke about part of him falling to its death, but part of him not. And the part of him that kept living was accompanied, that he found himself in a place with nice people who were accepting of his circumstance and not judging, not punishing, but accepting him for where he was. And he said, choosing to leave as I did created its own set of problems. I already had a list of struggles, and I added a lot more to the list. He said, the fact that I had lost hope made it difficult to look forward to being able to move through a list of things and have any improvement. He said it was a slog. He reiterated that he wasn't being punished. It's just that the whole thing was a sluggish slog, that he had to get some traction to be hopeful again after losing hope. The people around him said, that's fine. We'll be there in support of you, but you work at the pace that you choose. I think that's important for any of you who might be listening or viewing this podcast, who might be wondering about the fate of a loved one who has died by suicide. I have not seen anything to suggest that they are um, vilified or punished for religious reasons or any such thing. In fact, the other person in this two-person story said nobody came after me with pitchforks. Um, I just think that God is love, and some people need very intense loving, and especially people who've lost hope. I would say to any of you who might be imagining, wondering where your loved one is after they died by suicide, um, if you're don't let your imagination go to dark places that sadden you and make your grief harder than it has to be. What I've seen is that we're all given what we need, whatever it is we need. We're all known very specifically. We all have a team of helpers to assist us in our afterlife, and that includes everyone who died in whatever way they died. So I hope that's helpful to you. Anyway, he didn't go into a lot of detail about his surroundings. Some of the people that I've dealt with in this forum talk about very well-equipped clinics or spas where they're moving through a healing process. He didn't go into a lot of detail of that kind. He talked more about hope and its lack. One thing that he chose to say was that in the telling of his story, that he did leave behind a wife that he didn't confide in, that he could have. He could have given her a chance to know how hopeless he was feeling. His children were small, and he left uh, them with a long shadow, he said. Well, I was thinking about it. Even his children, he and this happened so long ago that his wife has probably long since died, and even his children probably have, because if they were born in the late 20s, early 30s, you're already looking at people that would be way up in their 90s, even coming at 100. Um, so their and then grandchildren would not have known their grandfather because he died before when his own children were small, before they had kids. So it made me a little feel a little more free to tell his story in case anybody, were able to identify him. We don't do that. We don't give, last names and detail of that kind. But anyway, he just said, the family matters don't belong in a book. They're private. So that was a choice of his. So you won't hear in this podcast anything about um, what, what might have happened when his wife died or his kids died or any of the dynamics of any kind of apologies or reunions or complex family dynamics. He just said that's private, doesn't belong in a book. So you won't hear anything more about it. Um, I really love this guy, and I look forward to meeting him when I pass, because he also mentioned that he was moving into alcoholism and that clouds a person's judgment. But then he said, I became a student of suicide because I wanted to know more about it. He said, there's not a one size fits all um, description of a person who ends their life by suicide. He said some people have a chemical imbalance in their body that's always with them, that disposes them that direction. Um, he said some people decide to take their life after they get a dire medical diagnosis and just can't deal with it. And then he said some people don't exactly positively choose suicide as an inevitability. They just do dangerous things that might uh, kill them and that sometimes do kill them. So, anyway, he was talking about suicide in a way that by taking on new information, he could be compassionate towards other people that had taken their life. He said, we're not all the same. There's a lot of nuance in here. That can be a way into compassion, because sometimes when we're at our least compassionate, it's because we make snap judgments. On the basis of very little information, we can come to conclusions that are unkind. And so anyway, even he was being compassionate. And he said that after he got in our line, after the first time that we met with him in 2019, he said, I was no sooner crossed over than they started putting me to work helping other people. I've seen that over and over again, that the way that what I call the kingdom of God operates is that everybody has something to contribute. Nobody's made to feel like they have no value or nothing to contribute. He was inside me, and he came to a memory of mine that I really was grateful that he brought up. He he spoke about having been in financial services, and he said one of the things that you do in financial services is help people assess what their assets really are, which might be easy if you're dealing with someone who's wealthy. But if you're working with somebody like he was, that was struggling to pay bills, you at least help them assess what are the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses. And he said, here, they didn't treat me just as a suicide victim that needed to be taken care of. They started asking me about what gifts and skills did I think that I might have to offer to other people. And they started giving me opportunities to use some of those gifts almost right away. Well, he found a memory in me of years when I was a pastor, and sometimes if you're the leader of a church congregation community that is joyful and service oriented and attractive, people want to be a part of it. And sometimes the thing that makes them want to be a part of it has a kind of consumer element to it. They come because they like the music, or they like the preaching, or there's some, maybe they like the religious education program for children and it's better than what they found at another church. So there could be a kind of a consumer element to it that's not in and of itself anything wrong. It's just attractive. But what I used to have my team do was kind of an intake process with people that said they would like to become a member, we would try to create a little meeting with them where we welcomed them in person, didn't just hand them contribution envelopes or send them an email, but do something face to face and in person where we'd say, we're glad that you're interested in these things that are offered here. Tell us what are some of the strengths and skills that you have that you might be able to make available to members of the congregation here. Remember, I was often in campus ministry settings, but I tried to run campus ministries in a way that weren't all, 18 to 30-year-olds because universities aren't. Universities are comprised of faculty, staff, alumni, current students of a wide variety of ages and life experiences. So I tried to make sure that was reflected in our programming, even though it was directed primarily at the current college student. And then maybe try to draw the college students into the life of the people who are beyond that, who are alumni. And so very often I would be part of creating religious education programs run by college students for the children of professors, for example. Well, anyway, he was inside me and he said, "There's a memory in here that's kind of like that. They treated me like I wasn't just there to consume their services, but that I was valuable and I had valuable things to contribute too." So he said that helped me gain hope, and that was the key virtue that he was really looking for. So I thought I'd include that here as part of compassion. I might have mentioned this in last week's episode that I'd make a distinction between uh, showing compassion toward a suffering person. That's what compassion means, to suffer with. But there's a similar word that is commiseration, to commiserate. And that word means to be with in misery. Well, sometimes as a counselor, I would be approached by a person who was suffering something and sought counsel from me, but then um, I was trying to be an agent of progress for the person who was suffering to ease their sufferings and maybe move from a place of suffering to something uh, happier. Sometimes people entered that process too soon where they weren't really ready for movement, but they really wanted what I call commiseration. Would you please be miserable with me? And I would say, if after a first session that felt like that, I would say, if this has made you feel better because I was with you in misery, I just want to be honest with you and tell you that I'm not good at doing that for very long. I can do that for a short time, but I really feel like that my gift is more being a change agent. And that if you feel like it's too soon for you to change, maybe we do this a little later. Uh, or maybe you find another person who can share with you in misery. But I found that I would begin to be dishonest if I stayed with a person who really wasn't interested yet in forward movement. Um, that does take hope, and that's one of the things that Bob told us. In fact, I think I'll end with this because he ended with it. He was a wise person, and he knew that he was being invited to contribute something in a book that would be kind of memorialized because once it's in print, it's there to stay. Um, he said, "I don't know if I can give hope to people who are grieving because someone they love has taken their life. I can't imagine myself being that. I would just say this to people: just do your best. And if you find yourself surrendering to hopelessness, speak up. Say that out loud to someone." I don't think I ever really did that. I just let it creep in. I didn't speak up. I didn't confide in my wife, who might have been willing to hear me out. I didn't give her a chance. I'll end with that. And then in the book, we put this in bold print, but it's still Bob's words. If anybody should read whatever I have to say, I would say, don't give up hope. And maybe ask for a signal to know if you're getting too close to losing hope. What if there was some sort of a meter or alarm that could go off inside of you. I was thinking of like the gas gauge on the dashboard of your car. It tells you that you're beginning to be low on gas. What if there was some sort of meter or alarm that could go off inside of you? Can you ask for some indication that your hopefulness is draining away? Don't let hope run out and run dry. Speak up. Do something. If somebody can help you, give you new hope. And he was saying this to my sister Catherine, and she said, "That's very wise advice. Thank you." So those are Bob's own words to you. If you believe that you could possibly be giving up hope, speak up. Ask for a signal that you're getting into the danger zone. Let somebody know. Don't let hope run dry. Maybe somebody can give you new hope. And of course, I don't do this podcast for no reason, and I didn't call it the Joyful Friar for no reason either. I believe that it's possible to have joyful hope even in a circumstance that hasn't yet turned the way that you wish it would. It's one of the ways that I live. As a Catholic Christian, we call Good Friday good, which just takes all the nerve in the world, but we're hopeful that whatever the bad thing is, it soon will turn. And that in that cosmic story, 3 days later, Jesus is risen from the dead and telling us to go tell the good news to one another, that we're all built that way. We're all very sturdy, and that we all have a future that can overcome what seems to have been the worst coming to the worst. With that, I will stop here. Next time, we'll finish this trilogy on the Bob story with spiritual practice. So I'll have some um, techniques or tips of ways in which to pray, meditate, think, act that I think evolve out of the story of Leaper Bob, who fell but now floats. So that's this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm grateful that you've been with me. Remember that I pray frequently for you, all of you in the audience who see or listen to this podcast. And when I do, I ask that the Spirit of God would be like breath, air, or water that would creep into the cracks of you, that anywhere there might be brokenness or places in you that are wounded, that the healing presence of the Spirit of the living God can find its way there and begin to bring about healing in you. So that's it. I'll see you next time. God bless. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.